this webinar is titled An Introduction to Effective Peer Reviewing. So our agenda for today is first, I'm going to talk about the motivation for the article and also the book. Three aspects of that: the importance of peer review, what the problems are, and how we define a high quality review. Abbie is then going to talk what we call the pedagogy, why you should review, what are the expectations of reviewers, what we call the 5 R's, and just briefly about the kinds of papers to be reviewed. And then we're going to go to our review template, which we developed, and we're going to go back and forth on that, talking about the different aspects of the review template and basically what should be in your document and some of the things that you should look for. So the motivation, why do a workshop like this? Why write a book? Why write an article? Why should anybody care? Well, as Sergey said, peer review is really critical to the scientific research process. And in surveys that have been done, most people would agree with that if we don't have peer review, then we don't really have good science. So peer review improves the quality of research articles. 85% of respondents strongly agreed that without peer review, there'd be no control. And there's been a number of surveys that have supported this notion that really peer review is critical to our research process, regardless of the field that we might be in. But the problems. So one of the big problems, which Abbie and I can attest to, and which surveys have found, is that finding and getting reviewers and getting them to accept the invitation to review is the hardest part of the job. I can honestly tell you that some of my associate editors, when I was editor of the Journal of Product Innovation Management, would send out 8, 9, or 10 invitations to review just to get 2 people to say yes. And that was a common occurrence. You couldn't just send 3 invitations and expect all 3 people to say yes. Again, Publons, which has done surveys about this, found that reviewer completion rates are decreasing while the number of invitations is increasing. And again, we found this, all right? We would have to send, the AEs would have to send a lot of invitations. And then eventually you get 2 or 3 reviewers. And then you have to hope that they do what they say they're going to do. So the completion rates. If you've sent papers to any journal, you probably have gotten those notices, or if you're a reviewer, you've gotten those notices that say your review is due in 1 week or your review is due today. So you get these automatic reminders. Well, it was not uncommon for our associate editors to send personal emails. I sent personal emails to reviewers asking them to please get their review in because it was late, and in sometimes months late. So we experienced these problems. I mean, these are real. There's also an imbalance in the review workload. In this particular study, they found that 20% of the researchers are doing 69 to 94% of the reviews. That's not good. That means that there are a group of people in whatever field you look at who are really overburdened with being asked to do reviews. And so likely they are saying no a lot of times because they're overburdened. And that means there's a whole large group of people that aren't doing any reviews at all. One reason may be because they're not being asked, which is certainly possible. And another reason may be because they don't really know how to do it. So there's, these are real problems that we experienced. Then there's additional problems. We didn't get this a lot, but we did get it occasionally where someone would write a 1-line sentence that says this paper, all right, put in your expletive, all right, or publish this paper as is, it's great. Now, those are not really helpful. As an author, you might think, oh, that's great. They loved it or they hated it. So, all right. But for an editor, we're looking for, and hopefully you as authors, you're looking for comments to help you improve the paper. Because the reality is every initial submission needs work. All right, it needs some improvement in some way. So these kinds of 1 or 2 line reviews are really useless to you as an author, and they're certainly useless to the editorial team, because we have to make decisions about what papers get moved on in the process and what papers get rejected. And this doesn't help us make those decisions. So there's a critical need to increase the reviewer pool, 1, and also to ensure that people who do accept the invitations are knowledgeable so that they can do a good review. And also, we need people who accept the invitations not only to provide a review, but to provide a high quality review. And so I'm going to talk about that next. So again, there are a couple of issues here. We need more reviewers, we need good reviewers, and more importantly, we need high quality reviewers who are really going to provide constructive comments to authors so that they can improve the paper. Because again, every paper, at least from the initial submission, needs improvement. So what's the solution? Well, there have been a number of surveys done. And as you can see here in these surveys, a high percentage of respondents have said, peer review training is important or extremely important. More peer review training will have a positive or extremely positive impact on the overall efficacy of the peer review process. 68% of respondents believe that formal training would improve the quality of reviews. The problem is we don't have really a lot of formal training in how to do reviewing. I mean, my own personal experience was, and which was many, many years ago, but I was never trained to do reviews. I've been learning throughout my career. And even as Abbie and I have been developing this workshop, writing the article in the book, I've still been learning. And so there is a lack of training, there's a lack of guidance about, how do we really do good reviews? So, oops, let me just go back a second. So that led to us, and again, in our roles as editor and associate editor, we realized that there was a need here to really create something and to help people to do better reviews. So we started with a small workshop, of a couple of hours. Then we expanded it to a day-long workshop. Then we wrote the article that you were asked to read for today's session. And then we wrote our book, which came out in January. So, we really felt that this need had to be addressed. And so we took some action to do that. So I've mentioned high quality reviews. So based upon our readings, before writing our article and our book, we read a lot of different literature. And so we came up with this definition about a high quality review. It's one which provides thoughtful feedback and constructive comments about potentially fixable concerns and those constituting fatal flaws, advice on how to better position and communicate the research purpose, design, execution, and contribution in the domain of knowledge of the journal, focusing only on the aspects of the manuscript for which the reviewer has expertise, and doing so in a timely manner. What I'm going to do next is break down these different phrases from this definition and talk a little bit more about them. So, thoughtful feedback and constructive comments. One of the things that's important is to try to recognize what your biases are, whether it's about a particular theory, about a particular method, about a particular type of research, a topic, and remove that when you're doing your review. You need to be as objective as possible and avoid personal preferences. For example, you shouldn't be asking authors to cite your research unless it's relevant to that particular study. And you certainly don't need to give them all of your articles that you should cite, that they should cite, because that's all about you. Reviewing is all about the authors. It's not about you. And so you need to put your ego aside and your personal preferences and really try to be as objective as possible. When we talk about constructive, all right, and thoughtful, we're talking about recognizing the strengths as well as the weaknesses of the paper. Most of the times when we get reviews, we get a lot of negative comments, but you also should be providing some positive comments. Where did they do a good job? And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the review template towards the end of this workshop, the webinar. You also want to provide some pathways for the authors in terms of how they can fix particular issues. And it might be several options. The point is, you are not supposed to dictate what the author should be doing. It's their work, it's their research. You can provide suggestions, that's what you should be doing. They need to make the ultimate decision, and then the editors have to decide, whether those decisions were appropriate or not. You also want to focus on potentially fixable concerns and those constituting fatal flaws. So fatal flaws, the most common fatal flaw has to do with method, whether it's qualitative or quantitative research. Sometimes you read a paper and it's just the study was not designed well, it wasn't executed well. And so there's just really nowhere that the authors can go. So you want to be able to say that, obviously, in a nice way. Other fatal flaws can do with, it's an uninteresting research question, or there's a lack of real contribution to knowledge and to theory. Those tend to be the typical ones. But you also want to comment on what can be fixed. But here again, you want to focus on necessary changes. No research is perfect, no paper is perfect, and it's never going to be perfect unless they maybe redo it all again. So what is necessary to make that paper publishable, potentially publishable for that journal, right? And so that's what you want to talk about. Your goal is not to redesign the study. You're making, again, suggestions. You are not a co-author, right? You're not rewriting the paper for them. You're providing advice, suggestions, and they need to decide which of those they wish to follow. Advice on how to better position and communicate the research purpose, design, execution, and contribution in the domain of the journal. So in initial submissions of papers, oftentimes there are some clear problems. Usually there's problems with language consistency, terminology, and there's usually an overall lack of detail about and information about the sample, about the literature review, usually about everything. So in an initial review, you want to comment on that. You can provide some guidance, for example, how they might position the paper better for that journal. Maybe they haven't dug into the literature enough. Maybe they're not using some of the appropriate literature. And so you can guide the authors to going to some other relevant literature that might help them create the story for what they're doing. In terms of contribution, I always talk about theoretical contributions. What are you contributing to theory? What are you adding to an existing theory, or how are you extending it? Or if you're doing qualitative research, what are you building? What new kind of theory are you building? The motivation has to do with, why is this study important? Why is it important that we look at this? And saying that, well, no one else has done that before is not a good enough reason for doing the study. That's not a strong enough motivation. Focusing only on the aspects of the manuscript for which you have expertise. One of the reasons that editors pick multiple reviewers is because they know that not everyone has the same experience and knowledge. And so you hope that by getting 3 reviewers, plus the associate editor, plus the editor, you're covering all the bases of the paper. So you shouldn't feel that you should reject an invitation to review just because you don't know the method, right? I'm not an expert in methodology. And so I will look at things, a little bit, but I will say, this is not where I'm strong, so I'm not really going to comment on that. And I leave it to other reviewers to hopefully fill in that gap. So, comment on what you can, Let the editors and the author know what you have commented on and where you feel you're not as knowledgeable, so that they know, okay, we're not going to maybe pay so much attention to your comments about method because you've already told us that you're not an expert in that area. The last point is about doing things in a timely manner. Again, according to this one survey, the average reviewing time per article is 8.4 hours with a median of 5. I can tell you that I spend a whole day when I do a review, and that's reading the paper, making comments, putting them into a written form that makes sense, editing what I've written, thinking about it, coming back to it. It does take time. And one of the reasons that, you might wonder, well, why does it take 6 months for me to get a response from a journal? It's probably because the reviewers have not done the review in a timely manner. So one of the pieces of advice for you is, before you accept an invitation to review, think about the time that you have. Do you have the time to do a high quality review? If you don't accept the invitation, because it really is a pain when editors and associate editors have to chase reviewers because they're not doing what they said they would do when they said that they would do it. So that's the definition. Now I'm going to pass it on to Abbie, who's going to talk about the pedagogy.
I'm going to talk about 2 things, starting off with, okay, Gloria just said it's 4 to 8 hours. What's in it for you? Why bother? I'm going to talk about 4 reasons for the WIFM, the what's in it for me, the 2 of which are the most trivial. The second 2 of which are the important ones. And I saw in the chat, that, hey, look, journals are profitable. They're very profitable. If they're so friggin' profitable, why on earth are we not getting paid for this? And there is a huge controversy over, should we be paid for reviews or not? And if so, how much? I recently saw an article that was suggesting, hey, high quality reviews, you should be paid $450 for. Let's do the math. $450, if you're doing a really good job like Gloria, that's about $50 an hour. That's about $100,000 a year in salary. That's about what you're earning by being paid $450. That is the biggest remuneration I have ever seen talked about. More frequently, I see something on the order of $100 or $150. Well, $100, 4 hours for a review, that's $25 an hour, is equal to about $52,000 of salary a year. Particularly for academics who are early on in their career, is it really worth giving up 4 or 8 hours of your potential research time, screw it, your family time, for a grand total of $100 or $200? Is your time not better spent on doing the research that's going to get you tenured or get you promoted? And so what you want to think about then is what's your value of time, and pick and choose the journals that you're going to review for. And my recommendation is you think very carefully about the most important journals in your field. And there are a series of A-level journals, but there are also a series of journals that are important in your field. JPIM is an A-level in some areas. It's an A, sometimes we call it a domain A. If it's important for where you expect to be publishing, if you're a brand person, that may be the Journal of Brand and Product Management, Product and Brand Management. Pick the journals that you're going to be reviewing for, and review for them, review well. But for the ones that are these journals that, hey, pay some money and get published and they'll pay you, think very, very carefully about spending your time reviewing for less than high quality journals rather than spending your time on your own research. And keep in mind that no top tier business journals pay for reviews, with the exception of the AEA, the American Economics Association. The second reason is personal fulfillment. We've seen over and over, honest to gosh, it's not me. I don't review for personal fulfillment, but there are people who review just because they like reviewing. They like seeing other people's research. Whether or not they learn anything out of it is they just enjoy the task. Now, I do it as my duty for the profession. I absolutely believe someone else is going to review my paper. It is my personal responsibility to review other people's papers. And some people do it for satisfying their curiosity. And I'll talk about the more important reason of that in a moment when we go to the next slide, because the next slide, Gloria, she's working on changing the slides. The next slide. I can't change the slides.
It's not, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, that's
there
it.
These are the two most important reasons for reviewing. Particularly when I was a young academic, I learned an enormous amount from reviewing other people's research. I mean, they don't teach you really how to write in your PhD program. They don't teach you a lot of things about the ways that different research questions can be more or less important. And I think the very most important reason to review is because it's a very cheap and efficient and effective way to improve your own capabilities. And there are three kinds of things you can learn in general about doing research. What are interesting research questions? What are methods? How to explain it? How to do good research? About research execution. What is a good methodology? What is a good positioning? How to do. I've learned more about how to do various different kinds of statistics. Back when structural equation modeling was becoming the rage in some of the journals that I was reviewing for, everything I ever learned about structural equation modeling, I learned from reviewing. Oh, here are the accepted, I didn't know anything about it, so someone else was reviewing that part of the paper. But if you go down to that next point, you learn not directly from reading and reviewing the manuscript, but you learn from what other reviewers say. And so in these ones where there's a methodology where you're not particularly knowledgeable about, someone else will be. If you want to learn about how to do that methodology and how to present that methodology in an effective way, read the other reviews and see how they pick it apart. That was how I learned to do structural equation modeling and how to present structural equation modeling. And that's the third bullet point above about the explication of your own research. Okay, so I've done a great methodology. What if I don't write about it effectively? Everyone's going to think that my methodology is incomplete, incorrect. So it's not only how to do the great research, it's how to execute it. In addition to paying attention to and learning from the manuscript itself and the other people's comments, look at what the authors do in return for those comments. And there are two different kinds of things you want to look at. You want to look at how the manuscript has changed, but you also want to look at how the authors have responded to the sets of comments that they received, and do this over multiple rounds. So one of the things that authors don't think of is, so you get a set of comments and you look at the comments and you think, well, reviewer 2 wasn't very helpful, so I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to answer everything in my response letter to them of, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I didn't do this. Guess what? That pisses reviewers off. And, I'll talk about emotion in a minute, but the last thing you want to do as an author is piss a reviewer off. And so you can learn about, okay, if an author comes back and tells me that every single one of my comments, they're not going to do anything about, and I'm annoyed, turn that around. That's self-learning about how you need to be an author in return. Finally, there are the career benefits. When we consider promotions from assistant professor to associate with tenure at the universities I've been at, and then from associate to full, we look for participation on editorial boards for the tenuring decision. If you're not on one editorial board by the time that you're a senior assistant professor who's not tenured, we kind of wonder if you really are participating in the field in a way that's contributing. And it won't be a showstopper, but it certainly won't help you. We just had a decision to full, where the individual had been an editor. It was one of two. He was a co-editor, but he was a full-blown editor as a tenured associate professor, not at the full level, Furthermore, they had just re-upped him for his second round. And we all looked at that and went, oh my gosh, he is really well thought of in this field if he's already an editor and he's not even a full yet. And it was, it made that decision by the committee at the college level just a slam dunk. And he went through with everyone said, yes, promote to full. And so you want to think about, how do you contribute? How do you get on these boards? And the way you get on these review boards and become an associate editor is by being a high quality reviewer. All right, let me shift over now and talk about the 5 R's.
Sorry, Abbie, but I don't know why my computer's not.
It's freezing?
Yeah,
Okay, so let me talk about the 5 R's of reviewing, and these are the expectations that we have of reviewers. You have a series of roles, a series of responsibilities. You're going to respond to what you see in the manuscripts. You're also going to react emotionally to it, and we'll talk about that. And overall, you need to show respect. And if we go to the next slide, there are 4 different kinds of audiences that you have to worry about. So think about, there are 5 R's and there are 4 audiences, and you're going to have different roles and responsibilities depending upon which audience that we're talking about. So there's for the author, for the editorial team, for the profession, and sometimes it's even overall for society in terms of in general. Let's start off with the roles of a reviewer. You are an unbiased advisor to the editorial team. Now, this is really important. We all have biases. Some people just don't. I mean, I've had articles that people rejected over and over and over again just because they didn't like it. An article that ultimately got published in JMR. Whoa, Gloria.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
An article that ultimately got published in JMR, the Journal of Marketing Research. There were 4 reviewers. One conditionally accepted it after the first round, one after the second round, one after the third round, and the 4th idiot kept saying, this is stupid, the person who did it sucks, and so does the research. This is stupid. I mean, it was the same review every single time. And I finally had to go back to the editor and say, look, he just doesn't like it. I've made it the very best I can do. So you don't want to do that. You can't reject something just because you don't like it. You also can't reject it because it's boring. If it contributes, it may be boring, but it could be good. The second role is really important, and this is what the author needs to see you as, and that's as a critic, but also a coach. So think about it as 2 sides of a coin. These are the issues that really don't work well now. And by the way, here are some possible pathways about how you can fix it. Okay, you're not a co-author. It's not your job to rewrite it or revise it. You're a consultant. I even think consultant goes a little far. I like coach. But some people work better with consultants, okay? And finally, you're a gatekeeper, and this is your position in the society. This is your role to society. Part of what we as editors need you as reviewers to do is we need you to flag ethics violations that you may be aware of because you are a subject matter expert, either in the field or subdomain, or you've just been looking at people broadly and you've been going to different conferences than the editors have. And so you may have seen things and been able to realize, oh, wait a minute, this is the same set of items as were used over here. And it is your job to flag those. And if you've got an issue, contact the editor individually and not through the review process and ask. I think there may be a problem. You can always go back to the editor and ask them to do a little more digging and to give them a direction in which to dig. The COPE is the Committee on Publication Ethics. They have ethical guidelines for peer reviewers, and everyone should be familiar with them. The issues that you want to worry about here are self-plagiarism as well as the plagiarism of others. Most of those are going to be picked up now in the automatic plagiarism online softwares that editors use, but perhaps not all. And the problem arises when you've got construct renaming, i.e. there are 4 or 5 items in a variable, and you use all 4 or all 5 of them, and you call it product development performance in one article and product development success in the other article. Same construct, slightly different names. And if it's used in a model where you've renamed 3 or 4 of the constructs, but they're all the same items, that's basically construct renaming, which constitutes plagiarism. We've also, Gloria and I, run up against the use of others' data without permission. Now you would think, how could this possibly happen? But it does happen, particularly where you've got proprietary databases, sometimes with qualitative, we've seen it, sometimes with quantitative. And then you'll usually get an email or a call from the author, from the person who collected the data saying, wait, stop. If you see that, if you know that it's someone else's data, let them know. The second R is responsibilities. Your responsibility to the author is to take the time to read the paper carefully. And that means for revisions, you've got to read all the previous stuff. Again, don't forget, you can learn from all of that, but also to provide critical, constructive, and concrete suggestions for improvement. So yeah, this isn't working well. And notice I don't say this is bad, but this could be improved. I like to state things that way. And that makes it more constructive. And then concrete, don't tell them this is the one way to go forward, but maybe you can think about doing it this way. Maybe you could think about doing it this way. Think about suggesting multiple specific pathways for improvement. To the editor and journal, you have a responsibility. This first word is really important, to aid the editorial team in making a decision. There will be times when an editorial team overrules your judgment. You say, reject, you got to be kidding. And the editorial team goes, I've got 3 other reviewers, and I think that there's more of a contribution here, and I think these things can be overcome. And they'll say R&R. It might even be a risky R&R. And you need to nod to yourself and go, think about it. Okay, why did they say that? What is it that's going on here? And take it as a learning capability. You also want to make the paper the best it can be, whatever decision you recommend. Okay, so the method is flawed. There are other things you can say. Here's how you could strengthen the method. This is, one way to help the author get started, but also I think a stronger positioning might be, and then be timely. I want to go back in this last bullet point to talk about, Gloria said something like 20% of the people are doing, I think it was 70 to 85% of the reviewing. That means you've got the pathways that are sending the field forward being dictated by 20% of the people in your academic field. Boy, is that stupid. You want to say in making sure the field bends in a particular way, be a high quality reviewer. If there's a startup field, you can bend it this way. You can help bend it that way by saying, there's some flaws in here, but they're overcomeable. And this new topic, this new subdomain is so interesting that I think we need to figure out how to help the authors make something that's publishable here. Don't let everyone else dictate where your field is going. Goodness, if I'd done that, I never would have published half the articles that I've published. So then there's the what you say. And we'll talk much more about this when we get to the template. But I want to focus on that third bullet point and that fourth one. And that is to give actionable advice. Don't, you suck and you're stupid. I can't. Okay, so I don't know what to do to fix that. But if you say, this research would be better positioned if you considered this field of literature and give citations, it's much better to do it that way. And again, necessary changes. As Gloria said, no research is perfect. There's always things you can do. It's really stupid, to have someone who's done 8 experiments and they've eliminated 6 mechanisms for how something happened. Is it really necessary to have them go back and run 7 more experiments to eliminate your 3 little mechanisms that you think might be potential possibilities? Mention it in the limits. Tell them just to put it in the limitations. I mean, if they've shown that 6 mechanisms don't work and therefore it's likely that this one does, eliminating 3 more seems like overkill. And finally, identify what you're not going to review and tell them why. And that's okay. You don't have to know everything about everything. Reactions. I would love you to remember that every piece of research is someone's baby. They have born the idea, they have nurtured it through the development of the research. And therefore, treat it like it's your baby too. Be kind, show empathy. Someone has put a lot of work even into bad research. Maybe it's that they were doing the very best with the kinds of data they could source, or they were doing the very best and they're a young researcher and they're trying a new methodology and they just didn't quite get it right the first time. And as part of that, use a professional tone. Try and keep, and can be really tough. There are times when I have written a review and the paper really pissed me off because either it was a revision where they didn't address a bunch of my comments, and my tone gets emotional. And so I have to put it aside for overnight and come back and then go, okay, you vented. That's okay to vent. Just don't send off the vented review. I even had John Hauser once on one of our papers. We got a reviewer who was annoying as anything. And he wrote, this man is a very mild-mannered man. He's one of the highlights in marketing science, one of the real stars, and very, very smooth emotionally. I'm up and down and all over the place emotionally. And he's just, he wrote this review response as an author that just, and I just sat there and went, holy cats. And he said, oh, you're going to fix it. You're going to make it professional. Same thing is true with you as a reviewer. The final thing, another thing to do is to don't gratify your own ego. There are certain reviewers that as an editor, we sent something to, and you knew they were going to cite 18 of their own papers and say that, if the author didn't cite these papers of theirs, they were going to reject the article. And it's like, nah, it's not about you. If you've really got stuff that's on point, and you likely will, because you've been sent as a domain expert, cite it. But also cite other people's work as well. You do need to be honest, but you can do it in a tactful way. One of the things you need to make sure you do is, if there is a fatal flaw, you need to make sure that comes across in the writing to the author. It's really disconcerting as an author if you read through a review and it looks like everything's hunky-dory, and then your paper gets rejected by the editor. And what the reviewer has actually done, when you look at this from an editor, is they write the thing as if it looks like it's all fixable, and then in the notes that they send just to the editor, they say, well, this is a fatal flaw, and therefore you got to reject it. And it ends up being rejected, but now the author is confused. And you need to make sure the author isn't confused about why you said reject or revise and resubmit or conditional acceptance. And I think that's it on reactions. The final thing is respect. And I think that is summed up as review unto others as you would have them review unto you. The golden rule as modified for reviewing. And we came up with these 10 C's because, of course, when you're doing a book, you have to be kind of cutesy. So we have the 5 R's, the 10 C's. We were trying for other people too, but it is how it is. There are 5 different kinds of papers you could be reviewing. Essays, most likely these are going to be desk rejected or editor reviewed. There are conceptual articles and there are theory development. And I tend to think about conceptual articles as developing theory, new constructs. Sometimes they're just developing new constructs. The market orientation paper by Coley and Jaworski. Some people call that, domain theory development or little theory development. Some people call that conceptual. I think of the differences between theory development and conceptual is theory development may have a research method, a qualitative grounded theory research method underlying it. Conceptual is all logic. And I find the conceptual articles more difficult to review because I never know when there's meaning there versus not. But I find those the most difficult to review. They're empirical, statistical survey, a panel data, all of those sorts of things. and mixed method. And what we're seeing as editors with mixed method is those are actually, people are saying, oh, all research needs to be mixed methods. And ultimately what happens is the vast majority of those are getting rejected because this reviewer is a specialist on experiments, and they see the experimental flaws. These people are panel and survey kind of experts, and they see those. And you can't satisfy anyone because they're very hard to do. You're going to have, in particular across these, different things to look at in the methodology, in the analysis, and in the results section. All of them should, have similar upfront kind of positioning and research question kind of things to worry about. But there will be lots of differences in the methodology, the analysis, and the results. Gloria is now going to convert over to the review template.
Okay, so as I said before, we developed this template, which basically we're going to take you through the major sections of the paper. So when you are thinking about writing your review, the first thing that we recommend, and others do too as well, is provide a brief summary of the study. We recommend 1 to 4 sentences. Why do you want to do that? To show the authors and the editors that you actually read the paper. Because sometimes when an author particularly, or even an editor reads a review, they might not be sure that the reviewer actually read it. So this is to show that you did read it. And it might be that in your reading, maybe you kind of understood it one way, and that's not the same way that the authors thought about it or planned it to be. And so that can also illustrate that as well, that, when an author reads your review, they're like, they didn't really get what we were saying. Maybe that means we need to communicate it in a better way. So these are just a couple of examples. I'm not going to read both. I'll just, the first one, this manuscript uses a grounded theory qualitative research methodology to uncover and organize into an already existing theoretical lens an extensive list of factors influencing knowledge sharing in new product development. So first thing, provide a brief summary of the study. Next is talk about at least one aspect of the paper that's positive. Again, most of the time we all want to be critical, and as we've been trying to tell you, you want to be critical and constructive. So there's got to be something good about the paper. Sometimes that's hard to find. I will certainly admit that sometimes I have difficulty finding what that one aspect is, but I do really try to say something. Maybe even though things are not clear, but it is written well. Like maybe they've, or maybe it's organized very well. Maybe they really did a really good job in terms of the method, the research design. So whatever it is, try to say something positive about the paper. And again, these, they're both qualitative papers, I believe. And so the bottom one, it says, a strength of the manuscript is the domain of what it is trying to do, which is investigate the adoption of new innovation processes with an eye to building theory, where most papers in the past, they haven't really tried to build theory on that. So again, think of something and don't say something positive and in the same sentence say something negative. Let this be positive, all right?
These are real reviews that I turned in, the opening sentence from them. And these actually were papers that I ultimately recommended rejecting and were in fact rejected. And even with them, you need to come up with, something that's positive. This also helps the reviewer know that you actually did read the whole thing and understood it.
Yeah. But again, don't qualify a positive with a negative. Say the positive, and then you can get to the critical comments below. So in terms of setting up your review, what we recommend, and again, others do too, is All right, you provide the summary, you provide the positive aspects, and then you get into what we call the major points of concern with the paper. And we're basically going to take you through all the different sections. Now, it's possible that not all sections will have major points of concern. And so obviously you have to be flexible and adapt this to where you see the major concerns of the paper. I will tell you that in my experience as being an editor and a reviewer, in my view, every paper has issues with the introduction in the first round. There are always issues about positioning, about motivation, about contribution. And sometimes there's no research questions, and Abbie's a real stickler about research questions, and other people are too. So these are some of the questions you as a reviewer need to be asking as you're reading these papers, all right? First of all, does the paper fit the journal? You know, maybe it does, but the authors haven't positioned it appropriately, again, within the right literature. So you want to provide guidance on that. Is it really clear what the study is trying to do? Sometimes it's not. And again, you want to comment on that. You know, are there clear research questions? Again, there are some reviewers that specifically request, and I agree with this, and I know Abbie does too, that it's really can be helpful if the authors pose the research questions, because that really gets at what it is they claim that they're trying to do. And sometimes what they claim they're trying to do, when you read the rest of the paper, you find out that there's a conflict there, that there's a disconnect. You know, what's the motivation for the study? In my view, it's not enough to, again, to say no one else has done this before. And I can't tell you how many times that we have read those words. The motivation for me has to come from theory. If you talk about high quality journals, they're looking for theoretical motivation in addition to, you know, what's the gap in the literature. But why, from a theoretical standpoint, should this study be done? Why is it important? You know, what's the theoretical gap? What are the theoretical contributions? Again, most initial papers will have issues with probably almost all of these particular aspects of the introduction. And for me, the introduction is really the key, you know, the key piece of the paper. Some reviewers, they shouldn't do this, but some reviewers, if they can't get a sense of the paper in the introduction, they might not be motivated to read the rest of the paper. As a reviewer, you want to read the entire paper. Again, focus on that for what you're knowledgeable. But again, I find that a lot of my comments tend to deal with the introduction. The next section is obviously the theoretical background, the literature synthesis, and if appropriate, there are hypotheses development. You know, I'm looking for, as a reviewer, an overarching theory. And again, most high quality management journals, they are looking for theoretical motivations, theoretical contributions. So as a reviewer, you need to be looking for that too. And we're not talking about, you know, cherry picking of theories, but, you know, one or two theories that frame the study and motivate the study and therefore make it important. When we talk about literature review, what you're looking for is a synthesis of the literature, not a listing of, you know, so-and-so did this and so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. But what you really want to see from the authors is a synthesis of what's been done, what we know, what we don't know, what the gaps are, and what particular gaps that this study is addressing. If there are hypotheses, as a reviewer, you want to look for, are the hypotheses clear? Are they able to be understood? Are they actually able to be tested? Sometimes hypotheses are written in a way that they actually can't be tested as written. And do the arguments support the hypotheses? Are they using the theory that hopefully they provided before to support the hypotheses and support the overall model as well? I mean, that's what I look for as a reviewer, is does whatever theory or theories that they've chosen, do they really support the whole model or support the research questions? And then if they do have a model with particular variables, does it also support the relationships among those variables? All right, so now Abbie's going to talk about research method.
Okay, and again, think about whether you're reviewing a conceptual article, a theoretical article, or a theory developing article, or a theory or hypothesis testing article. And you're going to have different methods and different analyses that you're going to be doing for each one of those kinds of things. But you still have the same issues that they're just going to be dealing with differently across those. And so the first of those is, sample and data collection. Is it a good sample? Are there a sufficient number of people or responses or cases? Have they been theoretically chosen? Are they appropriate for the questions asked? Are there sample descriptives? And this is applicable to both theory building as well as theory testing. Different kinds of sample, but you should know about it. Here are the case descriptions for theory building, or here are the descriptions of the interviewees, if it's not cases, but only interviews. If you are talking about respondents, what's the source of those? When did you collect the data? It's really interesting. There are people who will, manuscripts who try to sneak old data by you. They don't give a time or a source of them, of when the data were collected. You go back and ask, well, when was this collected? And you find it was 15 or 20 years ago. It's like, I'm not sure it's going to be appropriate there. You have to they have to have dealt with reliability, validity, in both theory building and qualitative as well as in quantitative. You'll also have common method bias and endogeneity when you're talking about the quantitative. Constructs. Do the authors differentiate between constructs, variables, and items? And this is true for both qualitative as well as quantitative. The data sources that build the constructs in qualitative data are words, but they are items that are then quantitatively measured and quantitative analytically tested for reliability and validity in quantitative research, versus they're built up and tested for reliability and validity differently in qualitative, but you still have to worry about all of the construct measurement. Analysis. One of the things that I find in qualitative research, where I get a lot of reviews to do in qualitative research, is that you've got people who say, yep, we used Yin and we used, Eisenhart and Gerbing, and we used this and that and the other. And we did primary coding, and then second level coding, and then axial coding, and then cross pattern matching. And then you get to the data and the analysis of the data and the presentation of the results. And it's like, yeah, they know the words, but they haven't executed in detail. And then your job is not to just say, you haven't done a good job of analysis. It's a better job in analysis would be, this is again, how you say something, the responses that you make. You need to not just show that you've read the material, but you need to demonstrate how you have gone through first level coding, second level coding, axial coding, cross pattern matching, and give examples of it. Data tables for both qualitative and quantitative not only need to be provided, but they have to be explained well. One of the things that I learned early on as being a junior reviewer is how important standalone tables and graphics are. If you look at a table as a reviewer and you can't understand it without reading the text associated with it, point out, I can't read this, I don't understand it, here's how a better table might look. And then in quantitative in particular, have they undertaken appropriate tests of robustness? In experimental research, have they undertaken, testing of the major kinds of other explanations? Not all of them, but the major kinds. There are lots of questions. You're not going to deal with all of them, so make sure you focus where you're thinking about. Results and findings, again, when you're talking about quantitative or experimental research, you're going to have different kinds of graphics and tables than you are with qualitative research, but they still have to be completely and accurately reported and consistently throughout. Are the visuals good? And furthermore, do they not go beyond the specific results that they can report? Have they differentiated between insignificant and unimportant results with those that are meaningful and believable? And this is true for both qualitative and quantitative. Just because an experiment has a statistical significance of p less than 0.05, this drives me up a wall. Some people report experimental results with students or panel populations where you've got a 3.5 and a 3.65 as the two results, and they're reporting them as statistically significant. That's true, but the order of magnitude difference between those two numbers is minuscule on a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 7 scale. And so that's the difference between, unimportant and insignificant. They're significant, but in my mind, they're not. The difference in the order of magnitude is unimportant. And you need to help authors understand the difference between significance and importance of their results. And then finally, you're looking for potential violation of ethics codes or signs. If every single hypothesis is supported, if it all looks too perfect, if all the data comes out just looking gorgeous, maybe it is too perfect. And maybe there has been some pencil research or some making up of data. As a reviewer, you are allowed to request access to the database, the primary database from which statistics were run. You're not allowed to use it for your own research, but you are allowed to request it. As a matter of fact, you're encouraged to request that. And if the author is not willing to provide that to the journal, with codicils of you can't use it for your own purposes, so that the reviewers and or editorial staff can check the statistics, then that can cause a retraction. And in fact, Gloria and I have retracted at least one article from the Journal of Product Innovation Management because an author refused to provide the database, so that we could check and see whether or not the statistics were real. Then Gloria is going to go on with this section.
Okay, so the next section of the paper is the discussion, the contribution, the implications. So I distinguish between discussion, contribution, and implications. So the discussion, to me, is you're explaining the findings. So why the findings are as they are. And you need to you as a reviewer need to look for all of the findings, that they're all explained and discussed in this discussion section, even if they don't, if there were hypotheses and hypotheses were not confirmed, that doesn't mean that the authors should get away with not explaining why those results are as they are. So you're looking for an explanation of all of the results, and it should be positioned within the theory and the literature that the authors used earlier in the paper. So that's kind of the context. For me, the contribution is the theoretical contribution. Again, what are the authors, what is the study contributing to theory? So whatever the theory is or theories are that they said are framing the study, what are they really contributing to that? One of the things that you may find as a reviewer, particularly in the first round, is what the authors say in the introduction about contribution and then what they say at the end are often two different things. There might be a little bit of similarity, but they're different. So there's obviously should be consistency in terms of what they're saying. And sometimes, because authors write the introduction first and probably write the discussion last, some of what they say at the back end makes more sense to be put up in the front end, but they just haven't gotten there. So again, those are the kinds of things that you want to comment on. And then implications. So there can be practical implications for managers. There can also be implications for policy, depending upon the journal. And so you want to comment on those. But one of the things as a reviewer to look for is, are those implications actionable? So for example, when I read managerial implications, I'm looking for not just a rehash of the findings. I'm looking for what actions could a manager take based upon the findings of this study. And so, and I will often comment to authors, these are not actionable. No manager what can a manager do with this the way that you've said? You haven't stated it in a way that they can actually take actions. And again, in terms of contribution, what is the study contributing to new knowledge in terms of the literature, but also what is it contributing in terms of theory? And I always distinguish between the literature contributions and theoretical contributions, because to me, those are different. They're important. They're both important. But again, in a lot of high quality journals, the editors and the reviewers are looking for those contributions to theory. How are you adding, extending, combining theories, and therefore making a contribution? The last section of the paper is obviously the future research and limitations. And, as a reviewer, you might think, this is not such a big deal. Well, it is still a big deal, because there should be some acknowledgement of limitations by the authors of the research. And to me, it should be more than just the standard things like, oh, we should have done a longitudinal study. Oh, we should have had a larger sample. I mean, those are true, but I'm looking for some thought as to, gee, what could we really have done better? What are really some of the really, limitations of the study that inhibit maybe our generalizability? And then also thinking about future research. So the findings may have created new questions. What are those new questions? Not just that, gee, we could have added this as a control variable or this as a moderator, but really what additional future research does this study tell us might be useful? So you want to comment on that as well?
So how many of you are overwhelmed? We have just given you, 50, 60 questions to think about as you're going through a review. And you may have thought, normally I crank out a review in a couple of hours. These two people are talking about 4 to 8 hours. What on earth? And I want to, don't let it overwhelm you. Don't spend 3 days on it. And what we want you to do is figure out how to get efficient as well as being effective. So you really have 2 options for structuring your review. First, you can structure it in order of the manuscript sections. Second, you can then say, screw that. What I really want to do is, if there's a fatal flaw, present the fatal flaw first. And then I'm going to present, and here's the next, of all the fixable things, here's the most important one to do. Sometimes I do it in the order of the manuscript sections. Sometimes, however, probably most of the time for me, I may start writing stuff and making notes in order of the manuscript sections, but when I go back then, I think, the really most important thing for them to think about, or the showstopper, the critical flaw, is, this, and therefore I want to discuss it first. Or this is the most difficult thing for them to overcome, and therefore I'm going to discuss it first. When you're writing and structuring your review, spend the most time on that. As things are less important, spend less time talking about them. Because what you want to do is cover the important and critical issues and give the authors a path forward for overcoming the ones that are fixable, without creating a 15-page review that notes every grammatical error on every page. That's not your job. Your job is not to rewrite it. Your job is to coach. If I was coaching these people in how to do better research, execute better research, or write up better research, how would I do that? And that's really important, is you want to be able to think in your own mind, is the problem with the execution of the research, is it just done wrong? Or is the problem with, it's really in the explication and in the writing up of the research? It's written so badly, it all looks horrible. And therefore the first thing I have to do is get them to correct the writing and provide all of the things they've left out. And it's sometimes not until the second review, where the writing is improved, the explication is improved, that you can figure out, oh my goodness gracious, there is a fatal flaw. It's not just that they explained it badly, but you got to help the authors get to that point in their first revision, so you can figure out, is it an explication problem or is it an execution problem? On the next page, we get to the minor points. Oh, this is even more important. The minor points are, look at grammar. Do you need to suggest a native English copy editor? Is it organized in an appropriate way? Can you follow the flow? And then, are there some minor things that they could fix that will help, but that aren't very important? So I tend to cover, the major problems, and I'll put a subsection of, positioning, method, analysis. And then I have a listed, specific comments, and I'll number them, page them, and those may be minor points covering the sections, or that may be up above. Finally, The paper that you have been provided as part of this webinar was one we came up with for AMSR, the Academy of Marketing Science Review, on how to conduct effective peer reviews for conceptual work. Edward Elgar came to us having seen one of our workshops and asked us if we would expand it into a book. The book is available at ebooks.com and on Amazon and directly from Elgar. If you want, think of it as a handbook. It's got the template. It expands upon all the sections. It's also got a quantitative and a qualitative article that we provide examples of for all of the sections throughout. And we provide 2 reviews that were done by different reviewers for each of these 2 articles, the qualitative and the quantitative, for each of the sections that we just went through. And I think we're now ready for questions.
And I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you very much, Abbie. That's wonderful presentation, very practical approach. We have several questions in the chat. I think so far I have at least 6 questions. 2 questions are very easy. 4 questions are less easy on the higher conceptual level. So shall I start with the easy questions? The very first question: when should we engage in reviewing? So, I mean, at what point of our academic life? Apparently, being a first-year PhD student, it's a bit prematurely to offer your services to any journal as a reviewer. You haven't read enough. Is it at the end? Is it at the point when you have already published your own article? So it's a responsibility. So what do you think? When is the ideal point for the early career academics to start reviewing?
So my point of view is PhD students should start, maybe not for journals, like in their first or second year, but you can review for conferences. There are tons of conferences out there. For example, the IPDMC, and those are just abstracts, so they're short. But I think, maybe the first year, you don't really know a whole lot. But certainly in your second year, I think you can get started with conferences. And then, as you get some exposure and experience, then I think you can move up to journals. But, we need to build a larger pool of reviewers. And the best place to start is when you're a PhD student.
So we shouldn't wait. We shouldn't wait until we publish our own article.
No, gosh, no.
So by the time you get to be a 3rd or a 4th year student, there are a number of journals that actually have apprenticeship programs that you can sign up for before you actually finish your PhD. And that's not a bad idea. What will happen is you'll end up shadowing. So you'll do your own review. It may not be sent back to the author, but you'll have access to the other reviewers and to the whole flow of how things go from beginning soup to nuts. And that can be very helpful because remember, part of the whole what's in it for me is my writing gets better. My ability to explain my research gets better as I see how others both succeed at doing so as well as fail at doing so.
Excellent. Great. I think I'm ready for the second easy question. Can you please illustrate the statement that construct renaming is a plagiarism? So what do you mean? And why do you think it's a plagiarism, construct renaming? What if we introduce a new meaning to the construct which was less elaborated? Or do you mean something different in your?
Well, so what we have experience with, Abbie and I lived through this together, is at least on more than one occasion where these were quantitative papers, there were a series of items. And if you looked in one paper, they were labeled, ABC. You looked in another paper, they were XYZ, but they were the same items. And there was no explanation as to why the name was changed. So to your points to that question, if over time the authors, because of their research in that area, they realized that, okay, this terminology maybe is better, then, you need to let people know that, both the readers and the editors. But in these cases, it was a series of papers where the constructs, again, the items were the same, but the names were changed, or items were drawn from constructs in other papers that this person did and then combined together to create another variable. That's not, in my view, that's not ethical. You don't do that kind of stuff. So if you do change a name for legitimate reasons, then people need to know that.
So typically it happens when someone is slicing and dicing a larger database. They've collected survey data or whatever. And now they want to try and they've spent a lot of effort collecting a large survey data. And now they want to slice and dice it and get as many publications as possible out of it. And so they come up with one model. These are usually Gazinta models. Here are the dependent variables, and here are the things that we're going to be testing in a structural equation model or some other kind of model. These are most typically done with perceptual measures rather than objective quantitative measures. And it's being done purposefully to try and milk and maximize the number of articles out of one database. And they never reference the previous articles that they published out of the same database, and specifically never said, these items we called as this construct in the previous one, and the reason we changed the construct name here is because of blah, blah, blah. We discovered in interviewing people that they think of it more as this kind of a thing, but these are reflective constructs or reflective variables, right, that reflect that overall construct. And if they're reflective, you just can't willy-nilly rename them. It's just not ethical.
All right, great. I think I finished with the easy questions. Now, now the difficult ones. So the distribution of the number of reviewers, the proportion of reviewers, and the proportion of the reviews executed, 20% and 96, is stunning, right? So, and I didn't know those numbers before I read that on your presentation and your article, and there is something wrong with that. So can you imagine, for example, we give that right of moderating, for example, our driving to those people who do that for free of charge, all right? So, or if we give rights to moderate our posts on social media to a handful of people who really want to do that and they don't need money, I would presume that the most radicalized, members of society would be prepared to do this job, all right? So those people who have strong opinions. So it looks like that if only 20% of the academic society do that stuff for free, they are prepared to do this kind of unpopular job of delivering bad news, right? In a while, the field probably would become self-referencing, right? Because why don't we pay money for the job of reviewing articles? Why? And recently we've read criticism on the business model of the editorial houses, right? So there is money in this business. Why shouldn't we? Is it going to be unethical? Is it about the cost structure? And £550 per day, probably need to pay similar rate to a plumber to fix your boiler. So why wouldn't we be prepared to pay similar money to professors?
So let me use Amazon Turk and other paid panels as an analogy. Amazon Turk has this paid panel and they have people who are on it, and there are actually people who make a living doing surveys. Let me tell you about the kind of surveys that they end up doing. They lie, they straight line, they zigzag, they don't pay attention to the questions. And it's not all of them, but it's quite a number of them. And the last thing in the world I would want to see is a number of academics who have decided this is how they're going to make their money, that in addition to whatever salary they get. And just because you pay someone does not guarantee that they will put together a high quality, thoughtful review. So now if you want to only pay for high quality, thoughtful reviews, You've now got to pay editors, or you've got to have the vast majority of whom are unpaid editors, oversee and make a decision as to whether or not a review is high quality enough for someone to get paid for. Now, if it's a binary yes, no, you're going to have a bunch of reviewers who come back and go, no, I thought about it. This was the way it is. And you're going to end up with an editor set of people who end up at odds with the reviewers that they're trying to get review. If you have a sliding scale, now that really puts a burden on the editors. And I don't think it solves a problem. I really don't. Just as MTurk, Amazon Turk, and Prolific in Europe don't really solve the problem of gaining respondents.
So Abbie referred to this earlier, but I had sent her an article. There had been recently a panel, and Taylor and Francis was part of it. And it's called the 450 movement. Someone published a manifesto arguing that, reviewers should get paid $450, which would be a reasonable fee. And so think about it. I know there's been some questions about the publishers make all this money. Taylor and Francis has 2,700 journals. All right. I don't know how many submissions they get every year, but let's say each journal gets 1,000 submissions. You need 3 reviewers per submission. All right, just do the math. That's a lot of money. So what is that going to mean? It's going to mean that costs of, licensing to get the journal is going to go up, right? So and the publishers are obviously going to add that up to the cost. So textbook prices will go even higher. Other books that you buy, their prices will go higher. So, and again, a number of years ago, I was in Asia, and I was in Japan doing a seminar, and my colleague specifically asked me to tell the audience of mostly Japanese academics that, most journals do not pay for reviewers, because there are parts of Asia where they do get paid, and it's minimal. It's, $100 maybe, or 50 American dollars. But, I don't see, again, I agree with Abbie, I don't see this as a solution. There was another article that we read for the book, which talked about, that there really are a lot of academics. So, and there's supply. The problem is, an additional problem is, editors, editorial teams don't know all those people. Even though they might be in their database because they submitted a paper, it's hard to go through a database of 1,000 people to pick reviewers, right? So, and there's also a lack of diversity, both from a gender perspective, from an ethnic and race perspective. We really need a greater number of people who are willing and able to review. And so again, that's part of why we're doing this and why we wrote the article in the book, is to hopefully at least educate people more about what reviewing is like or should be like. So hopefully we can increase that pool, increase the diversity of the pool, which I think would help solve the problem.
And a piece of this is not just helping you be effective at reviewing, it's also efficient. It's helping you figure out, how do I hone in on what are the important things to talk about? Understand, you don't write a 15-page review. You focus in on the critical issues. You write in a coaching positive way or coaching helpful way about them, and then you get on with life. I very rarely spend more than 4 hours on an article nowadays, but this is, years and years and decades of reviewing, because now I know where to focus my efforts. And, it's practice as you review more, you become a more efficient and effective reviewer, but we got to get you over that hump of, there's a huge steep learning curve. That's what we want to try and do. And, and let me turn it around. Do you really want someone reviewing your article who is only doing it for the money?
Right.
may air my opinion. I think, for example, 500 pounds in United States, it's not a huge amount of money. But for example, in places like South Africa, or and if you become an academic, and if you become, if you're at a certain level, capable for producing meaningful reviews and helpful reviews, right? And you do that job and you get paid 500 pounds, it's not going to be redundant. So I think this could be another way of addressing the diversity as well. All right. So I don't know whether you need to address the diversity among the reviewers across genders and ethnicity, or because it's double blind reviewing. So I don't know, but I think it would be fair. All right. I think it would be fair to towards good reviewers. All right, and that would filter the bad reviewers as well. All right, so those who
maybe that, I mean, that's there again. There's an assumption that because people will be paid, they'll do better reviews. I'm not convinced. So
at least
personally, I'm not convinced.
At least you wouldn't need to deal with the reviewers with a single line and 3 words. Or
maybe.
4 words, you know. So anyway, it's a conceptual debate. I'm grateful on your insight. You know, you've been at the place of editors, and you've touched the point with my second difficult question. What is the role of the editors? Should they serve the purpose only as the mailbox, getting the reviews from the reviewers and sending those reviews to the authors? Or should their role be expanded to the function of addressing the contradicting parts across the different reviewers? All right, so should they pacify those who are taking the process too seriously? So what do you think?
So first of all, I saw that comment. I don't know of any journal where the authors don't get all the reviews. I mean, maybe some low-level journals, they don't provide all the reviews, but any journal that I've ever reviewed for, the authors get all the reviews. So first of all, that should be automatic. And with most journals that have systems, it is automatic. To me, you know, I do agree with maybe the implication that, you know, some editors don't do their job. And that always irritated me because I took my job seriously, even though it was unpaid volunteer and I did it for 6 years. In my view, the editor's job is to make decisions. And sometimes they're hard decisions. And those decisions include, you know, whether you know, maybe, again, try to resolve those conflicts that might exist between reviewers, and giving the authors guidance about how they ought to handle that, or which reviewer maybe they should pay more attention to. But also just making hard decisions about when to reject, what to reject, and what goes through the process. I mean, personally, to me, to go through 5 or 6 rounds or more of revisions and then get rejected, that's ridiculous. That to me is an editor not doing their job. When I was editor, we tried for at most 3 rounds. Sometimes we went to 4, but if it went to 4, it was because I knew this paper was going to be accepted, but it wasn't there yet. And so I was guiding the authors to get there. All right. But I wasn't going to reject it. I mean, I knew that, but they didn't know that, but I knew that. But so unfortunately, there are editors who I think don't want to do their jobs, and that's a problem.
They want the prestige, but they don't want to make the hard decisions. They don't want to be the arbiter.
Right.
And that is a problem. You should, as an author, never have to do what I did as an untenured assistant professor and call up an editor and go, look,
right,
4 reviews, 3 yeses, 1 no, you've said revise and resubmit, this is stupid. Yeah. You know, I basically put my career on the line. I got lucky because I didn't quite say it in those words, and got the editor to finally make a decision saying, look, 3 said yes, you're going to hold out and this guy just doesn't like it. That's a dumb editor. And then if you've got a senior person on your research team, that's when it's appropriate for them to, it was a sole authored paper, so I didn't have a choice, but that's when it's appropriate for the more senior person to kind of go, look, what do you think? Is it going to happen? You need to make a decision here. We've done all we can do. And that is unfortunate. We actually just did that with an editor.
All right, thank you very much. I think the most difficult question, and do you believe that at some point there will be a system of making public the names of the reviewers at the point of publication of that particular article?
Well, there already is. I mean, there are systems out there already. There are open access journals. We talk about it, some of it in the book, and I don't remember the names of everything, but there are open access journals purely online that publish the names of the reviewers. But even in Elsevier, you can, if you review, they will ask you, can we, I think it's if they were to send it to another journal, that, would you want your name to be associated with the review? But that is becoming, I don't know if it's common, but we are seeing it. And so will there be more movement towards that? I think yes. And there's also now systems, and I can't remember if it's Publons, where you can put that you reviewed for such and such a journal. Because there has been a comment on a lot of these surveys that people want to be recognized for their reviewing. And again, in the surveys, a lot of people have said they don't want the money. They want recognition within their university, within their department, and also within their profession. And so some of these online access journals, some of the publishers have been responding to this kind of information that people want to be recognized. And so there are systems out there where you can let people know that you reviewed for certain journals. And we'll see more of that.
You will. It's really interesting, however, because the whole double-blind system originally got started so that unknown academics at unknown universities wouldn't be negatively impacted because they weren't a name. So that people who were coming in from developing countries, developing universities, could publish with an equal probability of those who are big names publishing from big universities. And now what we're seeing is, that whole supposedly equality in scientific excellence system, kind of sort of, it's called into question, appropriately so at times. But coming from where I come from as one of the few women, Gloria and I were 2 of the first women in innovation and marketing to do a lot of publishing and innovation. I never was hampered by someone knowing that I was a woman. I didn't have to use a Griffin to disguise the fact that I was a woman trying to publish, and I appreciate that. But systems have to evolve and change as priorities and as people evolve and change. With all of the internet now, you frequently can find out who's probably the author of a paper, and so we're losing that double-blind relationship on the authorship because of paper availability on the internet, and that may be part of it. Well, if we're losing that double-blind capability on the author side, we should also lose the double-blind capability on the reviewer side. Bad reviewers or reviewers who are saying nasty things should be stung. And the thought is, if we make their names public, they'll have to behave. And so that's part of the whole drive. We've had, there are arguments both ways. I have no good opinion, but that's how it is going to go, I think. And it'll be interesting to see whether minority academics from more minor and secondary institutions get stung because of the decrease in anonymity on both sides.
Excellent. I think I have finished with my difficult questions. Shall we open the discussion to the audience? If you have a question, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Abbie and Gloria? Ibrat, would you like to start with your question on coaching?
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. Yeah, my question earlier, which I posted in the chat as well, was pertaining to the fact that I really like the idea of review as a coach. I think it works really well on many levels. But part of the challenge with that one is, it's not easy to be a coach to someone you don't know, you never met, you don't even know their name. And I was wondering if if you could comment on that.
Well, I mean, yes, it's difficult, but again, I think one way to look at reviewing is it's a conversation. And a lot of people say that. I mean, I've heard a lot of editors say that. And I actually like that because hopefully that's what it becomes, is a conversation, but it's a written conversation. It's not an, oral conversation. But again, well, I mean, certainly for me and Abbie, we've been in this field for many years, and again, we have a lot of experience, so maybe it's a little bit easier for us to kind of provide suggestions and so forth. But again, you learn, but in order to learn, you have to practice, and so it's, again, all the 5 R's, thinking about what you say, how you say it, being constructive, saying the good things as well as what some of your concerns are. I mean, I always talk about concerns when I write my reviews. Like, I don't say problems, I say, these are my concerns with the paper, and I lay them out. So part of it is, just the way in which you say it, again, that tone, I think that can help to contribute to the coaching idea, even with someone you don't know.
Interesting. I've never had a problem not knowing who I was coaching.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even have thought of that as an issue, interestingly enough. And sometimes, I feel like I know a great deal about a person by the time I finish reading their paper. They reveal themselves. Interesting.
Thank you.
Never thought of that before.
Yeah, I never did either.
Great, thank you very much. Anyone? Next question. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question? We have manageable number of people on the call, so it's not going to be a mess.
Hi, Sergey. This is Ash. I already wrote my question in the chat. If you'd like to read it, or would you like me to read it?
Could you please ask your question?
It's regarding the unethicalness of self-citing. So if I'm doing mixed method research as a PhD student, if I first do the qualitative research and then try to get published that, and then later on do the quantitative, is this unethical? Especially as a PhD student, it might take a long time for one article to get published, and I'm under pressure to publish before you hit the academic market. So these are 2 different databases, but it's an exploratory sequential research project. So,
absolutely. That's not self-plagiarism by any means. That's research extension. You do the qualitative, here's your theory development. Then you've got the quantitative. You've defined the constructs in the first one. But you're going to have additional work in operationalizing those constructs. Some of it will have been reported perhaps in the qualitative, but more stuff will be reported in the quantitative. That's not a problem whatsoever. Even having a large qualitative database and coming up with a couple of different papers out of that qualitative database. And let me give you two sets of things to look at as people who've done that successfully. One is look at Gina O'Connor's work on radical innovation, the Radical Innovation Project, where she and a number of different authors have come up with articles about market visioning, about career management, about lots of different topics within the overall set of research that they did. And then Ray Price, Bruce Wojak, and I in our Serial Innovators research have about 8 different projects We collected data across something like 60 or 70 serial innovators and then 60 or 70 people all around them. We've got one article that's focused on the overall theory development. We've got one article that talks to processes, one article that talks to managing the politics, another article that talks to motivating and demotivating. And we gathered different pieces of research, but then analyze them in different ways so that it all builds on each other. So we're not slicing dicing the same database, we're coming up with very different, more detail on very different aspects of the overall model.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Does anyone want to unmute yourself and ask the next question? There was an interesting question in the chat from Kiran. You say that the reviewers' comments are recommendations, right? But whenever we got the response from the editor with the comments of reviewers, we need to address them one by one. And God forbid us to contradict their opinions. What's your perspective on this? Can you say that, you know what, your comment is rubbish?
Well, you don't say it that way. So first of all, I do believe that you do have to address each comment by each reviewer. I don't think you can pick and choose which comments you as an author respond to. But yes, they're supposed to be suggestions, but again, not every reviewer looks at it that way. You know, often reviewers will say, you must do this, or they imply that you must do this. So again, though, from an editor's perspective, that doesn't mean you have to, unless it's appropriate. And if it's not appropriate, then you do have to say why. You have to let them know why you didn't do this. For example, with methods, you know, it's oftentimes on quantitative papers that reviewers will say, you know, you should have used this analytical method rather than the one that you did. And sometimes the authors do because it's appropriate. And then other times they come back and they say, well, we looked into that, you know, and we compared what you suggested versus what we did. And we concluded based upon blah, 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 that what we did was okay. You know, authors can do those kinds of things. So yeah, and again, editors, you know, at some point have to make a decision as to what they expect from the authors, given the comments of the reviewers. And one thing about, you know, being an editor and reviewers, you know, just because we ignore maybe some of what you say doesn't mean that we don't value it, but our job is to try to get papers published, right? Most reviewers look at their job as you know, to reject papers. So, you know, I have to take into account not only your review, but the other reviewers, what the AE is saying, and my own feelings about the paper, because I'm representing the journal. So I need to take all of that into account, and I'm basing my decision on what I think is best for the journal. And so that may mean that sometimes I'm not paying attention to everything a particular reviewer says. But again, you know, let it go. This is not about you. I'm trying to do what's best for the journal.
So think about it in a continuum. So you're the author or you're the reviewer and you're getting stuff back. As Gloria said, an author should address all of the comments that are made. And you have three options. Fix it just as the reviewers told you to fix it. Fix it, but in a different way. So you're going to get to the meat of the problem, but you're going to fix it in a different way than the reviewers told you to do it. Choose not to fix it. If, as an author, you respond to everything, but 90% of what you say is, we chose not to fix it because you're wrong, you're going to piss off the reviewers. We're reviewers. We said these things because, you know, we know something, and a pissed off reviewer is going to come back and is going to have a bad reaction emotionally. That's how we are. And they're going to go, well, screw you. You don't think my comments are important. I spent a lot of time on this. Reject. And that you don't want to do. And so what you want to do as an author is make sure you address everything and keep a balance between doing precisely what the reviewers tell you to do in the way they tell you to do it, doing it in understanding that, yeah, you know, they flagged a really good problem. They didn't tell me I had to do it this one way. They gave me a couple of paths forward. Here's the path I chose, whether it's one they gave me or not. So I understand you flagged a great problem, and you know, I chose to fix it, but I'm going to do it in a different way than you suggested. And selectively at times, you're going to say, you know, it's a problem, but it's just not fixable unless I redo the entire research and it's a whole new research project. But Gloria's right, you got to give them some reason. And I find that as an author, you know, if you've done, you know, put everything in these three buckets and you've taken in and addressed the majority of the things that the reviewers and the AEs and the editor wanted to do, then you've done a good job. Turn it around. You're the reviewer. And you've given multiple pathways. You've said a couple of things where you have to do it this way. And you've got a panoply, you know, you've got a spread here of reactions. Your job as a reviewer is to understand you're a coach, not a dictator. So over here, you know, telling them you must do it this way, it's not the best way to do it as a reviewer. That's not a high quality reviewer. That's not the kind of reviewer that editors are looking to put on their editorial board. And so if you reject because they didn't do precisely what you said every time, you as a reviewer in the long run are going to be harmed. And so this is where you may vent as a reviewer in writing your second review, right? The emotion's going to come out if everything is over here I read everything and you're stupid and I'm not going to do anything, you know, and the editor then comes back and asks you to re-review, you know, vent, put it aside, come back, rewrite it professionally. Your job, even if you've got a stupid author who hasn't addressed all the things that they should have addressed, is to be a professional in your next round of reviews back to them. You can't control their behavior, but you can control your behavior and your tone, and you can make it professional. And let me tell you, an editor will value that. And that's how you get on to editorial boards. That's how you get considered as an associate editor position. And that helps make your international reputation. And that's what you want reviewing to do for you.